Welcome to today's 5-minute Bible study in the book of 1 Corinthians. Today we're looking at 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 24 through 27. In yesterday's session, we saw that Paul reminded us that in Christ we are free. We've been saved by faith through grace, and we are free in Christ. But in our freedom, we are thus enabled to live fully for Him, that we might win people for Jesus. Now, Paul follows up on that freedom in Christ and living fully to win people for Jesus by saying that we must discipline ourselves to achieve this. We must practice spiritual discipline in order to live fully as free in Jesus. Let's hear what it says in verses 24 through 27. Do you not know that in a race all the runners run, but only one gets the prize? Run in such a way as to get the prize. Everyone who competes in the games goes into strict training. They do it to get a crown that will not last, but we do it to get a crown that will last forever. Therefore, I do not run like someone who runs aimlessly. I do not fight like a boxer beating the air. No, I strike a blow to my body, and I make it my slave, so that after I have preached to others, I myself will not be disqualified for the prize. You see, Paul says, I put myself under spiritual discipline that I might fully live my freedom in Christ and that I might win others to Him. He compares us to an athlete preparing for the game. An athlete goes into strict training, strict discipline to be ready to compete well and to win the prize. Paul says, I want to do the same. And so the spiritual disciplines are my training that I might live fully this life I've received by faith in Christ. Now, spiritual disciplines are not legalisms. They are not laws we have to keep in order to keep God happy. No, spiritual disciplines are the means by which we live fully the life in Christ we have received freely through faith in Him alone. And by spiritual disciplines, I mean such things as daily reading of the Bible, keeping myself immersed in the Word, regular worship, both private worship and worship with other believers, prayer, regular times of prayer of communion with God, fellowship with other Christians, as well as such things as fasting and the practice of silence before God and listening to His voice. All of these are spiritual disciplines. Now again, these are not legalisms. They're not things we legalistically do. No, they are means of grace, spiritual disciplines to keep ourselves fully alive in Christ. Paul says, I'm free in Christ, but I go into strict discipline that I might live fully for Him. Think of it, the disciplines, like the banks of a river. You know, if a river stays within its banks, it runs freely and is deep and powerful. But if a river gets out of its banks, it spreads and becomes a flood and even a swamp. The spiritual disciplines are like the banks of the river. They provide the channels through which the life of God's Spirit might flow deeply within us. So the spiritual disciplines allow the river of God's grace, the freedom we have in Christ, to flow deeply, and it allows us to live fully for Jesus. So Paul says, I keep myself under spiritual discipline that I might live fully this freedom that I have found through faith in Jesus. Notice his last phrase. He says, I don't want to have preached the gospel to others and then somehow be disqualified. I don't want through lack of discipline to somehow lose my life of following Jesus. The disciplines, the spiritual disciplines, allow me to live fully for Christ, the freedom I have that comes through faith in Him, all by the grace of God. So let us be like the Apostle Paul and practice the spiritual disciplines as means of grace to allow us to live fully the life of freedom that we have in Jesus. Hope you'll join us tomorrow as we continue our 5-minute Bible study in the book of 1 Corinthians.